From Toronto to Tokyo, and from Chthonia to Syrinx, this is The Basement, your companion to the Ready Player One novel. Join our hosts each episode for complete chapter breakdowns and deep dives into the pop culture references through a series of challenges and homework assignments. The Basement is the Ready Player One podcast for people who love things. And now, please welcome Albert and the rest of the Gunchers for this week's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Basement Podcast. My name is Albert Padilla, and tonight we'll be covering Chapter 5 of the Ready Player One novel with an episode that we're calling You Have Chosen Wisely. And I'm joined this evening by two very special co-hosts. First up is he's coming back for his second showing, still hot off the heels of episode 002. Please welcome the John Hughes Blues player himself, Mr. Bill Elwine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Glad to be back.
Yeah, thanks for being back. It feels like it's been forever.
It sure seems that way.
It's probably been about a month now. But yeah, glad you're here, man. Thanks for helping out with this one. And also with us tonight is a very special guest. You may know her from Instagram page. It's _ Ready Player One _ where she's massed a huge Ready Player One fan following, myself included. Please welcome the dorky girl fantasy herself and a true Gunter through and through, Miss Morgan Marshall.
Hey. How's it going?
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm glad you're here because I asked you and I wasn't sure how that was going to go over, if you would want to do this or not. And you kind of jumped in full. So thanks for doing this.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited. Yeah.
And so we're kind of changing things up a little bit with the schedule tonight. And not that our listeners are really going to know one way or the other, because we're recording this tonight on June 12th, 2018, which all Gunters should know is the birthday of none other than the creator and inventor of the Oasis, Mr. James Donovan Halliday. And I posted something on social media today. I made this little confetti thing, and I've had a couple people like Dan Farah, who's actually one of the producers from Ready Player One, the movie. He liked it, which I was kind of pretty ecstatic about.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but today would mark Halliday's 46th birthday. And if you do the math, he's only got 21 years left to live, because I think he dies when he's 67. So I know that sounds kind of sad and morbid, but that's the truth. So just at the top of the show, I want to say happy birthday, Mr. Halliday, from The Basement and everyone here. And to Ernie Klein for doing all of this. So
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't really have any news really to talk about this week. And it would be kind of weird because we're kind of recording this out of order. This is Chapter 5, and I think technically we're only doing part 3 of Chapter 3, which we're going to record later this week. But before we jump into the main show, I've got a section here that I called Ready Player Morgan. And what I wanted to do was just, it's kind of a tradition on The Basement where as we get new co-hosts, I do want to reach out and just ask, hey, how did you come into the novel, right? When did you first pick it up? Was it something that someone gave you, or is it something that you were just interested in? What was your experience with the novel? So maybe, Morgan, if you could just kind of share your story and testimony into how you came into the book.
Well, back in 2015, it was probably about this time of the summer. I was getting ready to go on a trip. So I was looking for a nice book to read on the plane. Mm-hmm. And I was browsing around Barnes and Noble, the fiction section, and I literally just locked in on this book with Ready Player One written in big letters on the front of it.
Yeah.
And so I picked it up, and my first thought was that it reminded me a lot of the movie Idiocracy.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yep.
Okay. So
Bill, have you seen Idiocracy?
I sure have. It's an instant classic.
I know. Oh, I love it. It's so good. One of my favorites. And I think it's very underrated. But the cover of the book with Wade overlooking the stacks reminded me a lot of, how they're basically living on trash heaps in Idiocracy. So, I'm like, all right, dystopian novel set in the future, this is already right up my alley.
Check.
And then I read the blurb at the very top of the paperback, and it says, Willy Wonka meets the Matrix. And I was headed to the checkout before I could even finish that.
Yeah, right.
So
you hadn't heard about the novel prior to this. This was just something you walked in,
yes.
instinctively saw it, bought it on a whim, and hooked ever since, huh?
Oh yeah.
That's really neat. And I think you're the first one, honestly. Like everybody else that's been on the show so far that I've asked it's always been a recommendation from someone else, myself included. It was a recommendation by someone else to read it, and I think I forced you, Bill, to read it. So I don't know if that counts or not.
No, it counts, and yes, you did.
Yes, yeah, I did. Very cool. And now there is something else. So when I started, so let me back up. So we met. I wouldn't technically meet, but before I came on and did the show, and we were kind of talking about this before we came on the air. Before I did, when I pitched the show to Mike and pitched the idea and everything, he was cool with it and said make it happen. I realized, okay, well I've got to get started on social media, and it was there that I had found your Instagram page, and so I followed you prior to March 29th.
Mm-hmm. But
something very interesting happened on March 29th that I was not expecting. I know a number of people were not expecting. You called it a catfish thing, but would you mind explaining what you did with your social media page at that time?
Yeah. So I call it a catfish because I had a lot of people coming at me in the DMs.
Like, what's up, bro?
Yeah. So, I started my Instagram page in December of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
I just, I was getting really excited about the movie coming out, and I was like, I always follow pages like this, and I want to do it because I'm always wondering, like, who's doing this? Who's on the other side of this?
Right.
So I started to amass a little bit of a following, and people would constantly call me bro and dude, and just clearly it was very obvious that they were assuming they were talking to a guy.
Yeah. And you purposely were not advertising what, your gender at all, right? You were just posting stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, from the get-go, people were calling me bro. Like even when I had like one follower. So, I'm like, you know what? This is really funny. So I'm not going to say anything. And then the closer and closer we got to the premiere, I wanted to like kind of tease people a little bit. And, I'd say, so, do you think I'm a boy or do you think I'm a girl? Let me know. And most people voted in polls that they thought I was a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to go see the movie. I made a day trip of it down to the beach so I could see it in IMAX. Actually, scratch that. I ended up seeing it in D-Box, which is where, the seats are basically like a haptic rig.
Yeah, like they move and all that, right?
Yes, it was very cool. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, and so it was there. So if I could, so you basically came out on Instagram. I think you did kind of like a live video and said, hey, surprise, everybody, it's me and I'm a girl. And I thought it was really neat because it was very similar to, I mean, there's like a message, right? There's a thread within this novel that talks about that, right? The anonymity of the Oasis, and you can be whoever you want to be. We're going to actually touch on that a little bit later in the show, but it was a really cool little thing that you did. And I was like, wow, that's really clever of her to do. And I'm not a huge Instagram person, although I probably am now considering how much I've posted, but at the time, and I just thought it was a real kind of a neat concept that kind of tied to Ready Player One as well. Yeah,
I thought so too. Kind of ties into H and Artemis both. There were several jokes made about Artemis being a guy, hairy guy in his mom's basement
named Chuck.
Yeah. And then obviously,
and I think we know that guy, Bill. I think we do know a guy named Chuck who lives in the basement with his mom.
Oh, we do.
300 pounds. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, Morgan.
It's okay. And then obviously H ended up actually being a girl and not like the classic bro that she was made out to be in the Oasis. Yeah. Very cool. So I have to ask one last thing, and this is not on our show notes. I hope I don't throw you up, but there was a young lady that was in that video with you. Who was that? That was my friend Sarah.
Sarah?
Uh-huh.
Okay, Sarah. Hi, Sarah. If you're listening to the show, I just want to say hi because I never really got a chance to say hi, but it was so brief. Like she comes out there and you're like, hey, Sarah. No, she's gone now. So,
well, I will say that I was very nervous about doing this because I've never like done anything like that before where I was like, hey, what's up, guys? It's me,
yeah. Fast forward and you're doing a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, like, how the heck did that happen? Right. But yeah, that was my friend Sarah. We have worked together for a long time. She actually just had a baby yesterday. So
yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, she'll love to hear this. It'll make her day.
Good. Well, Sarah, if you're listening, congratulations on the baby. All the best. And nice to finally say hi to you. So, all right. So let's do this. Let's jump into the main show. And we've got a number of things that we're going to cover in chapter 4. Now, this particular episode has got some pop culture references in it for sure, but this episode is almost primarily and solely about James Halliday and the conception of GSS and gregarious games, and then what would eventually become GSS, and then obviously the Oasis. And so we'll kind of touch on definitely touch on the pop culture stuff, but there are moments in here where I do want to break off and go directly into the novel and kind of touch on some of that as well. So at the end of chapter 4, we get the sense that that things are kind of the suck for him, right? They're not going very well. He's as big as the Oasis is, he almost feels landlocked, right? He's like level 3. He can't go anywhere because he really doesn't have any money. And he's in this catch-22. He doesn't have any money to go anywhere to get money, so he can't really level up. We know he's like a low level 3 avatar. And chapter 5 opens up right after lunch, as bad as everything is, on the bright side, he's on his way to his favorite class, which he mentions is Advanced Oasis Studies. And he quickly brings us up to speed on just how much he knows about Halliday from all the biographies and the documentaries that have been published and produced, and all of which he's consumed. So really, he almost feels like he knows more than the professors, and truthfully, he probably does. But we get our first pop culture reference here right from the beginning, and he says that he's collected all of this Halliday notes and research in what he's referring to as his Grail diary, which he named after watching the third Indiana Jones film, which we all know as Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. So The Last Crusade, and the movie came out in 1989. It's directed by Steven Spielberg. It's a story by George Lucas, and I think it's Menno Meyjes is his name. And we're probably not going to get into like the plot and all of that, because I think most of the fans, if you're listening to this show, chances are you've probably seen at least one. I would hope you've seen at least one of the Indiana Jones movies, but it is, of course, the third movie. And just quickly, it's got Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, who's amazing. You've got Denholm Elliott, who's playing Marcus Brody, John Rhys Davies playing Sala, Sean Connery as Henry Jones Sr., which is Indy's father. And yes, we do get a very young River Phoenix, who's playing a young Indiana Jones in a short little origin tale that kind of happens at the beginning of the film. So, Bill, I'm going to start with you. But I kind of threw this question out there about when do you remember seeing it? Was this something that you saw like in the theaters, or were you into the Indiana Jones films growing up as a kid? And if so, when did you finally get around to this particular version?
So, yeah, absolutely. The first two were really important in my childhood. It was kind of like Star Wars, but not in space. And I'm sure I saw this third one in the theater, probably opening week, probably with my own father, who loves movies like this too. Yeah. So I know I was on top of this trilogy and must have seen this right away.
Yeah. Yeah. Morgan, how about you? Was this something that you picked up as a kid, or was this later on in life for you?
It was definitely later on in life. I wasn't even alive when this movie came out.
That's okay.
So, I remember, I've seen all of them. I don't remember exactly when I saw it, but it was definitely when I was like a teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for both of you, again, we won't get into the plot. Well, so quickly, it's here's the plot line. Indiana Jones and his dad are looking for the Holy Grail. Ta-da! Thank you. That's pretty much the movie, right? But so, Bill, what were some of the big standout moments for you in this movie? There's a lot of them, and we obviously aren't going to get into everything. This is one of those ones, like, so if I could just, let me digress for just 1 second. They have, Halliday he's got some movies that he calls the Holy Trinities, and this is one of those movies, honestly, one of the series that we could dedicate an entire podcast, and there are podcasts. There's like the Indy cast is out there, right?
Sure.
Where they just talk about this stuff. But what were some of the moments for you in this particular movie that you recall that you still hold up well for you at this point?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, this is definitely one that I had my own little bonding moment with my father. So like the father-son dialogue that's going a lot. There's a bit where they're tied to this chair inside this burning castle where they go back and forth. That part cracks me up and never fails to crack me up.
Yeah.
My favorite, of course, the iconic opening of the umbrella to send the birds in the air and crashing into the enemy planes. That's out on the beach. It stands out as one of these classic Jones twist moments, and something that makes this movie so incredible to me. As amazing as Indy was, his father, as simplistic as he was still able to take control of the situation and do something that even at Indy's age would drop his jaw.
Yeah, I mean, it spoke to, like, you know, you always wonder, like, okay, we got some of it, right? We understand if you watch the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which was a TV series that came out, you kind of got a good understanding of where he got some of his resourcefulness, his ingenuity, that kind of thing. But I think to your point, it was cool that this was probably something that was just in his DNA, right?
Yeah.
We saw it from his dad and maybe in a different way of him being just that resourceful to kind of do that. Now, Morgan, I know you watched this as part of the homework assignment, so thank you for doing your homework assignment.
You're welcome.
Very important. But I know you just recently watched this movie. What were some of the things that kind of stood out for you? Was there anything new that stood out for you that maybe you didn't catch the first time around?
Probably, there's probably like some jokes that stood out a little more than they did before. Well, definitely something that stood out a lot more, not necessarily a joke, but like the origin story.
Yeah.
The way they kind of pull together, like, okay, this is where he got his hat and his outfit, and this is where he got his scar, and from
the whip, his fear of snakes.
Yeah. A lot of that stood out to me a lot more this time around.
Yeah, and I would say, and I was alive when this movie came out, and it was quite old anyways, but when this movie came out, we went into this movie, and I don't remember, and I could be wrong, they kind of touched on it. You got to kind of sense that maybe they were going to give you some background. I don't think I was expecting to get as much of his background in his origin as I did. This was it's very much started off with, this is Indiana Jones and this is how he becomes who he was, because not only did we get all that, but we also got like the origin of his name, right? The dog was named Indiana. And just, it was a lot of, it almost felt like, and this is probably true, right? And we kind of talk about this on the Star Wars podcast that I do, but George Lucas was kind of tying up loose ends, so to speak, right? He felt like maybe at this point, this may be the last movie that he does. So he wanted to get some of this out of the way and really kind of tell the tale of Indiana Jones in the off chance that, he didn't go on to do other movies, which he did. In fact, we've got, the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull coming out. And then I don't know if you guys know this, but they're doing another one. So in 2020, July 10th, 2020, Harrison Ford has already signed on to do it. Steven Spielberg has signed on to do it. I forget who the writer is, but they've locked in the writer. And when that movie comes out, Harrison Ford will be 78 years old.
Holy crap.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. And he looks great. I mean,
he does.
Again, so he looks pretty good. I mean, and even like we saw him like most recently in The Force Awakens. And to be fair, he's probably done something since then, but I thought he looked all right. I mean, he can, he's still running around. So God bless him. 78 years old, still running around as Indiana Jones. Who would have thought that? So, so there's one thing I do want to talk, and before we move on, I guess for me, this was obviously the whole trilogy itself was a huge, like you, Bill, it had a huge impact on my life in a lot of different ways. If you ask me what my favorite movie of all time is, as big of a Star Wars fan as I am, it actually isn't any one of the Star Wars movies. It's actually Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Really?
That is my favorite movie of all time. And here's the thing. It may not be technically, it may not be great, better than some of the other movies. And you could probably think of other movies as well. But for me, it was more than just the movie itself. That was the first movie that I actually saw in a movie theater.
What?
So,
wow.
Yes. So prior to Raiders of the Lost Ark, I saw Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back. I'm trying to think what other movies. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Some of these movies in the late 70s, early 80s, I saw them all at a drive-in. And if you've ever been to a drive-in back then, everything was in stereo or like mono sound. You had a little speaker that you basically clung to the side of your car.
Right.
And the picture wasn't really that great either. But when that Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, that was the first one we drove, I don't know, man, like maybe 30 miles, which was a long time, long for us. But it was like a 30-minute car ride just to get to the town that actually had a movie theater. And the whole experience just blew my mind because we didn't get good seats, and I was a kid, so I didn't care. But we sat right in the front. So I had this huge screen that I was sitting in front of. I had this incredible sound that I had never heard of, right? All the stereo sound and everything. It was all, and then we had the John Williams soundtrack, and you had the movie itself and the acting and everything else. It just completely changed my life, and it really had such an impact on me that when, people ask, hey, what's your favorite movie? It's Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that's the reason why. Not so much the movie, but the experience that I had growing up as a kid. And then lastly, I guess the only other thing I want to kind of mention about the Indiana Jones movies is there is this really cool symbiotic relationship between Star Wars and Indiana Jones. In fact, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's an Easter egg where you can find C-3PO and R2-D2. They're kind of hidden in the hieroglyphics when Indy and Sala are pulling the Ark out for the first time down in the Well of Souls. In Part 2, Temple of Doom, the bar is called in Shanghai is called Club Obi-Wan, which is obviously talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi there. And then in this movie, in The Last Crusade, there is at the very beginning when he's on the ship, and you guys are probably gonna have to go back and look at this if you didn't catch it, but at the very beginning when he's on the ship, and that I forget his name now, the guy in the white hat and the white suit comes down. In the background, there's these barrels, and when the lightning flashes on the barrels, you can see it says Carbonetto, which is a play, or I guess a tribute to carbonite, which is what Han Solo was frozen in Empire Strikes Back.
That's clever.
So they've done a lot of it, and I won't get into the Star Wars, and then they reverse it. So in the Star Wars movies, there was actually Indiana Jones references as well. And for the sake of time, we won't get into that. Maybe I'll put some links in there where you guys can see them. But I always thought that was really cool. And obviously, this all stems from the fact that George Lucas is the creator of Lucasfilm at the time, and he was, he obviously had some inspiration there to kind of do a lot of that. So, so let's move on from Indy. And it's from here that Wade makes a comparison of James Halliday. He says that he compares James Halliday to some very prominent nerds, to use his words, or geeks. He says he was a god among geeks, a nerd uber deity on the level of Gygax, Garriott, and Gates. And so the homework assignment that I had for you guys was really just to kind of brush up on all three of those particular folks, and look at maybe some of the qualities that maybe Halliday shared with them. So Morgan, did you get a chance to look at these guys, and is there anything that jumped out? Was there any one particular, like between the three of them, did any one of them jump out almost immediately as someone that you would compare James Halliday to, or were there characteristics maybe of all three of them that you kind of saw in him from the novel?
I don't know. It was, I guess, if anything, I would say Bill Gates reminds me of Halliday the most, even though I think he's not quite as awkward and antisocial as
right.
Halliday is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he definitely reminds me the most of Halliday.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think if you look at all three of them, right? So Gary Gygax was the inventor and creator of Dungeons and Dragons. So from that aspect, we know that Halliday created the Anorak's Quest, and he talks about how when that game was created, there was a lot of puzzles and stuff that everybody liked. I think that was particularly a trait that he was pulling from there. Garriott, which I think we've talked about on one of the episodes now, is responsible for all the Ultima games, and he obviously, when I think about like Anorak's Quest and the games that we're talking about here from Gregarious Games, that almost seems like it's parallel. It's almost like a parallel to what Garriott was doing in the early 80s, mid 80s, and even in the early 90s with the Ultima series. So that's that characteristic. And then for Gates, I think it's just that awkwardness of it, right? The maybe the stereotypical physical image of what we think is a nerd. There's plenty of pictures out there where we see, Bill Gates, and he's, scrawny looking and really, sickly almost. And I think that's probably where he was pulling him. But Bill, I'm going to go to you because Garriott created a lot of games in the 80s that were all obviously Ultima games. But was that something that you jumped into growing up, or was this something? Did you ever get into any of the Ultima games?
I did. In fact, my first introduction was Ultima 4, and I believe I was in junior high school at the time.
Oh my gosh, that was mine too. Ultima 4.
Yeah. I mean, I had backed into some of the other games after that, but hours and hours on the Commodore 64.
Yep.
Even at that point, it was like no other game that I'd ever played before. And certainly one of his previous games, Akalabeth, I think it was called,
yeah.
seems like it was very parallel to the inspiration for one of Halliday's first games. I can't remember exactly what he called it in the book either, but it has a really similar name. But the whole open world concept and gate travelings and things like that are pulled directly from Ultima, with the king at the top. Yeah. Halliday taking a pseudonym, much like he did as Lord British. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels there between them.
Yeah. So yeah, Ultima 4 was so Quest of the Avatar. That was the first one I played, and I remember I don't remember what magazine it was, but it was one of the computer magazines, and I remember opening it up and it had that full spread, like the full sheet, and it was the map. I'm talking about where he's standing there, like on a rock, and there's like a huge wave, and he's got the Ankh on a staff, and you can just see the back of him. Mm-hmm. Like that image itself was like, whoa, what is this kind of thing, right? And this kind of goes back to what we talked about on one of the shows, like early on, especially, early 80s, a lot of the games, whether they were the Atari 2600, television, computer games, whatever it was, a lot of times you were sold on the cover art,
sure,
right? Or what they were, because the graphics were, a pixel's a pixel and a block's a block, but you kind of got sold on the cover art, and that was enough to get you in the door, at least, so that maybe you could enjoy the rest of the game. But that was definitely one of them. And then the follow-up was Ultima 5, which came out in 1988. That was Warriors of Destiny. That was another one that I remember. I had that on the Commodore 64, and I played that to death. I mean, I couldn't even tell you how long I played that game for. And then I didn't really get much. Like there was and I was trying to think about this going into the show, in show prep. I couldn't remember why I stopped playing those. I don't know if I had shifted to Nintendo games, or at the time the NES, or maybe the Super NES was coming out, or whatever it was. But I kind of got away from it, and it wasn't until I think 1999 when Ultima Online came out that I got back into it. And that was my first foray into MMOs prior to World of Warcraft. And that game was amazing. I don't care what people say about it. It would get your blood running, right? There was this fear of death, like that was real. Like you'd start sweating when you were out there, because there was PvP zones, and people just killing you for no reason, right? They were just griefing you the whole time and stealing your stuff, and then they chop your body up, and it was brutal, but it was a really amazing game, and it was very kind of cutting edge, honestly. And a lot of what we see now in a lot of these MMOs really kind of go back to Ultima Online and what they were doing there, and all of that. So really fond memories of all of the games that Garriott did. And just by the way, and I don't know when I'm going to bring this up, but there is a game that he's got out right now called Shroud. Oh boy, I'm going to kill this one. I think it's Shroud. I forget now. Something of the Isles. But anyways, that particular game, there's some references as I've been doing, prep for the novel and for the show. There's some references that I've found that trace back to this game that he's just come out with. So my guess is Garriott and Klein are pretty close, and maybe when he was looking for inspiration to call something in the novel, he called him up and said, "Hey, Garriott, I've got this wand I need to get a name for. Can you give me something?" I think literally he probably said, "Hey, we've got this in the game. Call it this." So when we get to those, I'll be sure to call that out. So from here, we kind of get this flashback almost immediately. And so here we go. We're flashing back to June 12th, 1972. He's talking about, this is when James Halliday was born, only child. His father was an alcoholic machine operator. His mom was a bipolar waitress. And we get the sense that he was really socially inept. And that word comes up quite a bit, that he was socially inept. In fact, I think at one point he mentions that he was probably functioning like a high functioning autism, like somewhere on the autism scale. But he mentions that when he was in junior high school, that one day in junior high, Halliday was sitting alone in the cafeteria reading a Dungeons and Dragons player's handbook. And this was fascinating for me because as a kid, this was kind of me. I actually would bring this, as nerdy as this is going to really sound really nerdy, but I would bring my Dungeons and Dragons books with me because I was, reading them and wanting to play. And I was the same way. It was hard to find people to play with. So I was that kid at one point. But so to go back to you guys, did you guys ever do any kind of tabletop role-playing games growing up at all?
I have never played Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. I want to, but kind of what you were just saying, I've never had anybody to play with. Because I'm an only child. And so, yeah, I've never played any of that.
And Bill, did we talk about this on the last show or not?
No, I don't think we really went over this.
Because I don't know if you did or not. I don't think we've ever talked about it.
Well, my brother is a couple years younger than I am, and he and I and friends from the neighborhood, we played a little bit of D&D. We didn't really know the rules. No one really wanted to read those thick, books, and definitely no one wanted to be the dungeon master because that sounded the most boring out of all of them. We pretty much faked it, but we had the best time, and we learned a lot about dwarves and orcs and things like that. But we did our best, and I think as we grew up and learned more about how the game is actually played, realized that maybe we didn't have such a good grasp on it.
Yeah. And it was a different time, right? I mean, growing up in the 80s, especially like the early 80s, if you were playing Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, you might as well just put a freaking bullseye on the back of your back because you were a target, right? Especially with the athletic guys and I actually was athletic too. I mean, I was kind of straddling the fence between both of them. I was trying to satisfy my curiosity of athletics as well as my curiosity of two-handed swords. But I had stacks of D&D books, and I'd buy Dragon magazine, and then eventually Dungeon magazine, and then when the Star Wars role-playing game came out, I came out with that. And it was very similar, where you would see somebody, and they would have a magazine or have a book, and you'd go, you'd get the idea that, okay, wait a minute, that kid's probably like me. Maybe I should befriend him. And it was only through doing that, all right. And that was the hard part for a lot of folks, and Halliday included. They just they couldn't muster the courage to go up and just say hi, all right. And so, unfortunately, there were a lot of people that I knew that were just kind of like these closet players or never really, made the social bonds that they needed to actually play this game. And then come internet, the internet and MMOs and all that, then it kind of makes it easier because, you can kind of hide behind an avatar and all of that. But I did want to mention that based on the timeline. So if we look at the timeline of when this was, and he mentions that it's the Player's Handbook, it's probably one of two things. It's either the first edition of the AD&D book, or it's the revised D&D books, which was kind of like the basic set. But given that some of the other references in the novel, I'm going to go on record as saying that it's most likely the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook that Halliday that's referenced here, that Halliday is holding. And only because in Anorak's Invitation, the video from way back in chapter 1 or whatever it was, chapter 0, he mentions that the Dungeon Master's Guide is the book with a Jeff Easley cover where you've got the dungeon or the guy opening the big doors and all of that. So it's also here that we get our first mention of Chthonia, which is the world that he created in Dungeons and Dragons, and then later on we know that this is going to become the final battle place, right, in the novel and in the movie too. This is Chthonia is kind of where they have the big battle at the very end, and then he meets Ogden Morrow, right, and so Ogden Morrow becomes his best friend. He's the one that sees that Halliday has the handbook and invites him over to the weekly D&D gaming session. He's there suddenly with all these other mega geeks. They accept him, and the rest, as they say, is history. And go ahead. Did you have something to say?
Oh no.
Yeah. So we know that they would eventually go on to create the Oasis, but that Klein writes something very specific about the relationship. He kind of says that they're very similar to Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and then he also mentions John Lennon and Paul McCartney. So as for the homework, have you guys followed, are you guys Apple guys? Folks first, let me ask you that. Are you Apple, or are you guys more Android? Are you doing the Windows thing? But is Apple a big part of your life every day, Morgan?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Since the first iPhone came out, I had a MacBook before that, but I have not had anything since the first generation iPhone. And then I'm sitting here with a MacBook in front of me now, and I've got an Apple TV screensaver on right now. It's everywhere.
Yeah. And Bill, you were an Apple guy at one point, were you not? When you switched to Android?
Sure. I've been on and off Apple pretty much my whole life. I'm Android right now on my phone, but I'm a recent convert to Mac on the desktop.
Oh, welcome.
Welcome. I've always liked them, and I've owned a few of them over the years.
Yeah.
But I think that is where I am in life right now. This is what works really well for me, although I enjoy the flexibility of Android on my phone still.
Yeah, no, for sure. And really, so going back, just taking it back to the novel, he mentions that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and of course, we just talked about Apple, but, they were the ones that kind of started all of that. And a number of other things as well. And we won't talk about Steve Jobs here. Maybe we'll do it somewhere else, but there's a whole, the man did quite a bit in his lifetime for sure. But apart from the technical aspects, I always found it funny that in the novel, Klein refers to Ogden Morrow as rotund, which I naturally always just envisioned that if nothing else, they were, similar in physical form. So Ogden Morrow and Steve Wozniak, I always just envisioned that they were this, big, round, chuckling, charismatic guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then the John Lennon and Paul McCartney reference. So I guess for the homework stuff, I had asked you guys to see, maybe take a look at, did you have a favorite song from either one of them? And maybe a favorite Beatles album. So Morgan, is the Beatles something that you listen to? And if not, well, either way, did you, if you had to pick a favorite song or a favorite album, what would you go with there?
Well, the Beatles, I absolutely love. I have since I was a kid. Honestly, I don't have a favorite album, specifically, but one of my favorite songs is Love Me Do. And that,
so the old stuff.
Yeah.
The really old stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. That was written by, McCartney when he was a teenager. And obviously, it falls under the Lennon McCartney credit. And I think it came out in 1963 was when they released that song.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. You really did do your homework.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Top that, Bill. Well, and one of the things too, so, and you kind of touched on this, and just real quickly, when you look at a lot of the Beatles songs, there's songs that are written by one or the other, and then there's we won't get into it, but there's like this whole legal thing that happened, right? Where they had to agree whether the song was a Lennon-McCartney song or a McCartney-Lennon song, which seems kind of weird, that there's a distinction. And I guess I understand the nuance of it, right? Whose name is first on the list, but it's very interesting when you kind of read that. So if you get a chance, go read on the history of that, because it is particularly interesting. But what about you, Bill? You got a favorite song or favorite album from these guys?
Well, being a musician myself, I was always really into the Beatles, but there's really too many to choose. They had so many albums, so many songs. Hey Jude was a favorite. Let It Be, Norwegian Wood. Help is an amazing song. Favorite Beatles album? Probably Abbey Road. It's just filled with gems. We got Come Together, Something, Here Comes the Sun, Golden Slumbers, The End. It's just jam-packed with prime Lennon McCartney stuff. So
you mentioned you're in so if you guys don't know, Bill is in a band, successful band at that. But do you guys do anything in your rotations, like with the Beatles at all?
We actually do. We do Come Together.
Nice.
We do sort of a hybrid version of the Beatles and Aerosmith take on it, as well as our own little edge to it. So we try to make it a lot of fun, and as well as keep it relevant to the crowds we're playing to these days.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
So I get you're a big Aerosmith fan, Morgan?
Yes, I am. I saw them in concert in 2013, I think. Mm-hmm. It was amazing.
Yeah. So I would say, Yesterday is probably my favorite Beatles song.
Oh, I forgot about that one.
Yeah. And that's from, well, you mentioned Help. It's from the 1965 album Help. But my favorite, man, this is like picking your kids on favorite album.
Yeah.
And I know what you're saying, because like you can name any one of these albums and it's like, oh yeah, that's it. And then you look at the other one and you're like, oh no, that's it. And you look at the next one and you're like, oh no, wait, no, this is it. I promise this is the one. But if I had to, I'm on an island. I can't listen to anything else but one particular album. I'm probably going to go with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band.
So good.
1967. It's either that or Abbey Road or the White Album.
No, all of them.
Or Revolver.
All of them, yeah. Or Revolver, right? Yeah, I forgot about Revolver. Yeah, it's too hard to pick one. But so anyways, and so I guess the reference really here, or I guess the pop culture reference is really speaking to the fact that, Lennon and McCartney really did some amazing music, right? Arguably some of the best music that's ever come out from human beings. And the fact that, they had that kind of relationship and they had that level of creativity together. What Klein was trying to do was say that, Halliday and Morrow were, as creative in a different way, obviously with video games, but they just kind of had that way of being able to collaborate like that. So anything else about the Beatles before we move on at this point from either one of you guys?
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
All right. So at age 15, Halliday creates his first video game called Anorak's Quest. And here's where so much of what, this reminds me of the Ultima series, like I said earlier, when he's kind of talking about the way they, not only that they programmed the game, but kind of like the grassroots effort that they went through where they were packaging these things and putting them on floppies and putting them in the computer store. And, he sets Anorak's Quest, the video game, in Chthonia, which is a carryover from his Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And in here, they kind of talk about a lot of different home computers, console systems or computer systems, everything from the TRS-80, the Commodore 64, the Atari 800 XL. He mentions the Apple IIe. And the reference here, he says he programmed it in BASIC on a trash 80 color computer he received the previous Christmas, though he asked his parents for a slightly more expensive Commodore 64. So just kind of throwing this out there. And Bill, I'll start with you. And I don't remember if we talked about this or not. It's all kind of bleeding into one another, but did you guys have any of these computer systems that came out, like the home computers in anywhere during the 80s at all?
Yeah, we did. My brother and I ended up with a Commodore 64 as sort of our primary gaming / screw around
BBS
computer, right? BBS computer. But our first household computer was a TI Professional, which is sort of like an IBM clone compatible type, but it was portable. It was about the size of a suitcase, and the front opened up. The keyboard would pop out. It had like maybe a 5 or 6 inch green screen monitor built into the front of it, like 64K of RAM, no hard drive, no mouse, of course. But it had 2 5 1/4 floppies, which apparently was a pretty big deal. We only had 2 of them in the whole house, so I guess it didn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, and it was a big deal because, if like, let's take the Commodore 64, for example, like you would if you go buy the computer, right, at the time, you literally had a keyboard with all the components built into it. And that's it. There was you had to buy everything else on its own. So once you forked over enough money for a disk drive, that was great. But in order to actually copy anything, because we didn't have hard drives,
right,
you had to buy another floppy drive, right? So you had to have 2 of them. So the fact that you had one with 2 of them already built in, I mean, you were way ahead of the game at that point.
And then you needed a program that would copy them.
Yeah, right. Apart from that, right, the computer didn't have it. You had to actually have a program that would do it for you. Did you ever do any programming on that thing?
I did. I learned BASIC at a summer camp very early on. To show my age here, I probably learned BASIC in 1983 or 84. Mm-hmm. I was writing choose your own adventure style text games. That my brother would play and make suggestions on how to improve. Yeah, it was like it's very Zork-like because it was right around the time that Zork came out. So it was, you're in a forest, you're in front of a house, and now you're, but yeah, we would play these games back and forth. He'd help me figure out, like, well, hey, what's the next step I need to do here? And they would end up with either more ninjas or monsters than I knew what to do with in the game. That was what we were into back in 84.
Yeah. And you mentioned Zork. We'll get to that at some point, probably in the next 4 years.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
But yeah, that's a little bit later down the road. Okay, so Morgan.
Yes.
Did you have any of these console systems, computer systems? What was the first home computer that you had?
I know that it was a Pionex.
Pionex? I don't think I've ever heard of that one.
No. That's really all I know. It was, I'm pretty sure, I mean, it had a mouse. I know that much. And I used it to play Blue's Clues software game.
Nice.
I'm sure y'all have played that before.
Oh, yeah. I still do to this day.
Yeah.
I'm going to play it right after we're done here.
Right.
Yeah, and I had some Barbie games.
Yeah.
And then I would also go on the Barbie website using dial-up. And I would, basically, it was a virtual paper doll. That's all they had back then. And I would spend hours doing that, tying up the phone line. And apparently my parents would just let me do it.
Yeah. Well, you don't have any brothers or sisters, so you really weren't competing with many people.
True.
for the phone. So that's good.
So I remember these Pionex. They were sold. They were sold at some stores, but they were sold on the QVC a lot too.
Okay.
They were old Intel MMX computers. They had
okay, so they were like clones of IBM.
They were IBM clones, right? They had
gotcha.
20 gigs of 20 megs, 20 megs of RAM. Yeah. But yeah, they were one of the first PCs that had like a CD-ROM and a modem built into it, but they had VGA style monitors. This was around Windows 95 era.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Wow, that's a lot later.
Ouch. Easy.
Ouch. Oh, yeah. All right. Next topic. No, I had a Commodore 64. I had an Atari 400 first, not the 800. This is the 400. So this looked like the old. If you ever went to McDonald's in the 80s, they had their cash registers had these overlays on them. And so when you wanted a Big Mac, they would push a button that said Big Mac, and it was like a plastic, again, overlay that went over a keyboard. But it looked kind of like that. It looked like the McDonald's cash register. And it was terrible. It was a horrible system. I didn't really care for it that much. And I'm saying that it's probably pissing people off because it actually was kind of cool. But compared to like the other ones that I got, especially compared to my C64 or even my Atari 800 XL, which I really loved, it was night and day difference. Now I had a buddy of mine who had a TRS 80 color computer too. So this would have been like between 83 and 86. And I was always envious of that one because one, it was super cheap and I didn't have my Commodore 64 yet at the time. But he always had lots of really cool games, and it was color, which, again, back then it was kind of a big deal. But yeah, it was, and then I think beyond that, I don't know. I think I had an Apple IIe later on, and it was kind of when the Apple IIe was like from 1977 all the way to 1994. And I probably came in on the tail end of that, just because they were super cheap and nobody wanted them at the time, because at that point in 94, I mean, you're talking, we're already in the IBM, 386s and all of that. So, yeah, probably a little bit outdated, but it was a different time for sure, with the old computer. So, so we should note, I guess we should also note to kind of provide some context. We get that Anorak is his name, and this is where it kind of comes in, and it's given to him, it's christened to him by a British exchange student that Halliday meets, and I think I mentioned this already. So if you have somebody that is an Anorak, right, in the vernacular over there, just means that someone is obsessed with something in particular, usually pop culture, video games, that kind of thing. So he gets this nickname of Anorak, and that becomes his avatar name. Of course, we know that. And so the computer game that he creates for his D&D friends initially, all of it it's just chock full of all these puzzles and riddles, and his friends really like this. And, this becomes obviously the prototype for what would become, the Oasis, and obviously the Easter egg, right? The hunt and all of the riddles and everything that he puts in. So he's kind of setting the stage here to say that this is just something he's always done. And the Oasis and the hunt was just the last extension of that. They make some art. Like I said, they throw some copies into a Ziploc bag, and then they sell these on at the local computer store. So, all right, I'm going to surprise you guys with something, because this is something I didn't put in the show notes. But he mentions that they put them in these little Ziploc bags. And I have a question. These little bags that you guys put sandwiches in, do you guys call them Ziploc bags, baggies, sandwich bags? What do you call them at the house, Morgan?
Totally sandwich bags.
Sandwich bags.
Yeah.
Okay. Bill?
Either Ziploc bags, definitely Ziploc bags.
Ziploc bags. So see, then that's the thing. So there's a lot of these, right? This whole genericized is the term in which we give a particular item a proper name, and it just becomes the proper name. So here's some other examples. A jacuzzi. Right? Everybody goes, oh, I'm going to go to a jacuzzi and relax. That's actually the name. It's not really what it is. It's a hot tub, right? How about Frisbee? You guys have a Frisbee, or do you play disc golf, or do you play with a flying disc? I don't know what you call a Frisbee. What is Frisbee
I don't even
called?
know why you're asking that question. It's a Frisbee.
It's a Frisbee.
That's all it ever was.
Okay, Morgan, you just cut your knee and you need to put something on that cut. What do you put on there?
Neosporin. Even if you're not about Band-Aid.
No, there you go. There's two of them.
Well, that's another thing, though. Like, even if it wasn't Neosporin, I'd call it Neosporin.
Exactly. So there's two more. You got Neosporin, you got a Band-Aid. Bill, what about you? What are you putting on your knee there?
Definitely Band-Aid.
Yeah.
That is after I dab off the blood with Kleenex.
Yep. Kleenex.
Yep.
Good job. That's one. What about you need to fix something and you need some glue that's going to get on there and dry super fast? What are you putting on there, Morgan?
Super glue.
Super glue. Really? Not, I don't even know what you call it. I would call it super. I've heard crazy glue. That was another one, right? That's another brand, but that's what we refer to it.
I like to call it the Craggle per the Lego movie.
Yeah, the Craggle. All right, so I got two more for you, and then we'll move on. So if you, let's say, Morgan, growing up, someone gives you this round hoop, and they tell you, put this over your waist and spin your waist around. What are you using?
A hula hoop. Oh, wait.
Hula hoop.
Yeah.
What's it called, though, without the proper name?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah. Nope.
I have no idea.
I thought that was the proper name.
Nope, that's the name of it. It's called a hula hoop. That's the name of the company that makes it, or the product itself, but it's not the toy.
Oh, wow.
All right, the last one, because Bill, yeah, you do. I've seen you in a hula hoop before.
Wait.
But what's that?
Have you? Okay, go ahead.
No, I don't know. I'm just kidding. Okay, let's say you've got a present. You need to wrap it up, and you want to put some clear tape on it. What kind of tape are you using?
Scotch.
Scotch tape.
Easy.
Yeah. Not clear tape, not transparent tape, whatever they call it. It's Scotch tape. So anyways, I thought it was fun, little game. And he mentions in there that, again, it was Ziploc bags. But when I read that, I was like, well, that's technically a sandwich bag, right? And yeah. So, all right, we'll move on from there. So, okay, with all that out of the way, we learned that he starts up Gregarious Games in approximately like 1988. And they almost don't graduate from high school because they were working on Anorex Quest 2. And then, so just a quick timeline, in 1988, this is when they start Gregarious Games. 1990, they move the company to Columbus, Ohio, which we know is, prominent in the novel. And it's, it's very close to Ernie Klein personally. So that's kind of where that came from. And then in 2002 is when Gregarious Games goes public. And just kind of from an operational perspective, Ogden Morrow kind of takes the PR and the business affairs aspect of it all, because he's naturally charismatic, kind of a jolly guy. While Halliday kind of just stays out of the limelight altogether, and essentially all he's doing is programming. He becomes like this hermit, and Klein mentions that, or I guess Wade mentions that that he'll go days or weeks without any human contact whatsoever. And then we also get some other kind of characteristics and traits from Halliday. He's awkward in interviews. He's hyperkinetic. He's aloof. Again, he mentions that he's socially inept, that he spoke really rapidly at times, and he had this awkward laugh, and people really didn't know, what he was laughing at sometimes. He'd sometimes get bored in interviews and just get up and walk away. And then this is where we get more of the fact that he was obsessed with the 80s culture, and that he was probably living with some kind of Asperger's syndrome or some other high functioning, again, autism. And then by the age of 30, after the company goes public, they both become billionaires. And apart from their lavish homes, we learn, and here's the quote, Morrow bought a Lamborghini, took several long vacations, and traveled the world. Halliday bought and restored one of the original DeLoreans used in the Back to the Future films. So for the homework here, I thought we'd just kind of maybe talk about both of them. And I'm going to just throw it out there real quick. If you guys had to pick between a DeLorean and a Lamborghini, Bill, which one would you go with first?
Yeah, definitely growing up, the Lambo was the hottest thing around. I mean, The kids in the neighborhood had the posters with the 3 Lambos parked outside of the 3 garage doors. Like that was the whole pinnacle of wealth back in the 80s.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I mean, my favorite growing up definitely is Lambo. But I think without the time travel thing, it probably still would have been. But now, oh yeah, I take the DeLorean. It's so much more style.
Yeah. Morgan, if you had to pick between the two, which would you go with?
Definitely a DeLorean. Honestly, it's never even been a toss up between the two. It's always been a DeLorean for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would have to agree. Like, and I'm with you on the Lambo, because that was like, I remember I never had posters with the DeLorean on them, but I had tons of posters with Lamborghinis on there.
Really?
And it was just, and there was usually a female on there too. But anyway, those posters were like everywhere. And one of and just quickly, and we won't get into this because I could spend all day talking about this stupid movie, but have either of you ever seen Cannonball Run?
Sure.
Okay.
I have not.
Have you ever seen? Okay, not shocking, but It's fine. Don't worry. You're not missing much.
Okay.
But it's a movie that came out a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And the opening scene has a Lamborghini in the whole bit is there, it's the cops chasing him and all that stuff. But that was kind of one of the scenes that stood out for me, I think, growing up. And, you see that in the way it's filmed and then obviously who gets out and all that. But yeah, that was, again, like you said, the pinnacle of wealth. If you had a Lamborghini, you made it. And it's funny because kind of like what you guys said, growing, well, Morgan, you said there really wasn't any competition, but Bill, yeah, like that was what I wanted back then. But now, yeah, DeLorean all the way. It's just so much cooler looking. And it's kind of very interesting history. Did you guys read up on the history here about where they are today?
I saw a Netflix documentary that talked a lot about where the DeLoreans are now. And a lot of it had to do with that movie that I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But yeah, there's not a lot of them left.
Yeah. And for the DeLorean, so DeLorean ran from 1981 to 1983. It was really only 2 years initially. And then later on, and you guys can go read about the whole history. It's very interesting. There was a couple companies that tried to bring it back. And even to this day, I think it got hit with the laws. There were some lawsuits that were involved and it kind of halted production. And I guess to the best of my knowledge, they are still making these. Everything's kind of come to a screeching halt. I think it's a company out of Dallas or Houston that's trying to do it right now. But they're still around. And every once in a while on my social media feeds, I get these like sponsored ads for like DeLorean watches. Do you guys get these ever pop up? I don't know if it's because I'm doing Ready Player One stuff, but it constantly comes up in my feed, and I don't know where it's coming from. But yeah, they make these DeLorean style watches, and it's by the DMC, the DeLorean Motor Company.
Nah, it's just you, Albert.
Yeah, that sounds cool though.
All right, well, I'll share the link with you guys because I'm tired of seeing it. But the one thing too that we should note, let's talk about the DeLorean just very quickly. It's a sports car. Which I never really got that it was a sports car. Growing up, I always knew that it was made of aluminum. Mm-hmm. And I never knew whether that was a good thing, whether that was a bad thing. My Pepsi and Coke cans were aluminum, so maybe it was cool. I had no idea. But it was always interesting with the doors, right? It's got like the gull wing doors, right? That open up. And to be fair, the Lambo has that too. Sort of. They've got the suicide doors, I think, don't they?
I mean, Lambo made all different kinds, but yeah, I think they're mostly known for either not the suicide, but the ones that come up sort of straight up in the air.
Yeah, right. That's it.
So rather than like wings, more like, I don't know.
Aren't those called like
eyebrows?
Butterfly doors? Maybe I'm wrong.
I'll take that. Final answer.
Great.
Yeah, and it had like a fiberglass body. And it goes without saying, okay, so let's get the elephant in the room here is obviously Back to the Future, right? That's where this particular vehicle made its claim to fame. And suddenly it sparked a lot of interest, that maybe the car didn't have at the time. And it just became iconic, at least from a pop culture perspective. And it's been that way ever since, obviously with all these movies or with the Back to the Future movies. And then with Ready Player One, you've got Ernest Cline. He's got one of them. His brother has one of them.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I'll do a quick story on that. So when Ready Player One, the novel came out, he had a contest and kind of an Easter egg contest. And he got the winner of the contest would get a DeLorean, literally. Here you go. Congratulations kind of thing. And when the winner got it, Klein told the gentleman or whoever it was and said, hey, look, if you guys, for whatever reason, if you can't keep this vehicle before you go sell it, please call me. I'll take it off your hands again. No problem. And I think a couple years passed and I apologize, Ernie, or whoever, if you're listening to this, I apologize if I'm screwing this up a little bit, but sure enough, the guy was like, hey, you know what? I need to get rid of the vehicle. I'm going to have to sell it.
Man.
So Klein's like, okay, no problem. He buys the vehicle and we'll do this in another show, but he actually ends up taking this vehicle and uses it as part of the, if you ever see Game Over, the Atari documentary and the E.T. being buried out in New Mexico, that documentary that was put together by Zach Penn, the DeLorean that he's driving, that Ernie Cline is driving in that documentary, is the vehicle that he's just gotten back from that person that won the contest. And when it was all said and done, he had two of these vehicles and he's like, okay, what the heck am I going to do with two DeLoreans? So he ends up giving it to his brother. And his brother's on Instagram. He's on, I think, Twitter as well. But his brother has turned his version of the DeLorean. He's a huge Star Wars fan. And so it's got like an R2-D2 sitting in the back of it now. He's got like a Millennium Falcon in the trunk or in the backspace of it. He's got Han Solo's blaster right there in the front. I mean, he's just completely decked it out as a Star Wars DeLorean. So you've got, Ernie Klein's DeLorean, which is Ecto 88, and that's got, Buckaroo Banzai. It's got the Ghostbuster symbol on the side. It's got the flux capacitor and all that, right? That's his inspiration. Then he's got his brother, his older brother, I think, who's got a DeLorean that's all Star Wars. So anyways, little background on that one. But let's talk about Back to the Future. And Morgan, I'm going to start with you. Where does this rank for you? And I already know the answer to this, but where does this rank for you in terms of your favorite movies?
Oh, it's definitely number one. Just
number one above anything else, huh?
Yeah, it really is. I saw, I guess I probably saw the first one at a very young age, very, very young, probably like 7 years old. And I fell in love with Marty McFly. Like growing up,
as we all did.
I had a huge crush on Marty McFly.
As we all did. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. I've just always absolutely loved all of the movies. I've seen them all a million times. I've always loved anything futuristic. So I guess that's probably why I'm so drawn to it. And it's just so great. It's kind of timeless. Like the jokes are awesome. Christopher Lloyd is hilarious constantly. It's just such a great trilogy. Yeah,
and we'll have to do we'll have to get into those movies a little bit later. In fact, I think we are because in chapter 6, which again is that dreaded chapter that I've been worrying about, there's so many pop culture references, and that's one of the ones that we'll be hitting at some point. So maybe I'll get you guys back on there and we can dive into that a little bit more. But Bill, for you, was this one of the movies that, or I guess that whole series, was this something that stood out for you during the 80s?
Sure, absolutely. I remember seeing Back to the Future at the theater in the Arboretum, which was a movie theater here in Austin, North Austin.
Is it gone?
It's still there. I'm not sure if it's
Indy
the same.
Now,
right.
Yeah.
This theater, when it was built around this movie. It had a clock tower in it. It had clouds on the ceiling. It had the old like soda shop in it. This theater was built around this movie coming out. And it was that way for, 15 years. It's completely changed now. It looks different, but I will never forget seeing that movie there because of that particular theater. Yeah, amazing movie. The jokes still hold up for sure. I remember feeling very old when I found out that we're closer today to when that movie was filmed when that movie was supposedly taking place in 85 than 85 was to 55
right
back when it was supposed to be so far in the past. It was like, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely a classic, and it's funny because you see a lot of the stuff, and again, I said we wouldn't do this, but there's so much stuff in that movie, in that series, really all three of them, that was kind of science fiction, or at least we thought would come someday, and it seems like some of it has happened and some of it is very close to happening, and some of it we're still a little bit far off on, but I guess we'll get there at some point.
Yeah, and it was one of the only series that really treated time travel in a way that it got complex enough to be interesting, but not so overly complex you couldn't follow the story anymore.
Right.
Yeah, right.
They did a great job.
Good point. All right, so I threw the question out there. If you guys had $1 billion, what would you do with it? You just won the Oasis, Morgan. What are you going to do with your money?
Man, like peace and goodwill aside.
Of course. After all that's been done, what are you doing?
Probably just kind of doing something similar along to Wade's original aspirations. Maybe not going off into space, but just like living it up. Like, buying a big old mansion and some, maybe a DeLorean and a Lambo. Maybe
sure,
like a few of each. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't know what I would do.
Maybe some, I think I would, Bill, what are you gonna do with $1 billion? You just won you got the you won the egg, or you beat the contest. What are you doing with the money?
I mean, I'm going to hire my favorite bands, right, to play for me and my friends.
Oh, that's a good
We're going to do
Yeah.
that for sure.
Yeah.
You know, we're getting all the bands that are broken up. We're getting them all back together. Maybe make my own movie with my own favorite actors and directors. Who knows? You know, who knows what that would, it would probably be terrible, but I mean, who cares? I'm a billionaire, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's making it rain.
That's
yeah,
right.
Plenty of stuff that you could do.
Stupid stuff. Yeah. I'm not
stupid
going
stuff.
out with.
Yeah. And I don't know. I didn't even think about what I would do with this, apart from like saving, Earth. After there was money left over. I don't know. I'd probably upgrade my podcast equipment. So maybe have my own little studio, like a really
you
nice
need
studio.
to calm down, Albert. That's a lot to ask for.
Yeah, I know. My needs are very humble.
I think you need to start upgrading your guests.
That's right. I'll hire all my favorite podcast hosts to come and do a show. No, I'm kidding. They're right here with me now. So,
Aww.
all right. So enough of the happy feely stuff. All right. So from here, we'll move on. And there is another reference in here because these guys, as part of their newfound wealth, they went out and eventually, bought the world's largest private collection of this is Halliday. He bought the world's largest private collection of classic video games, Star Wars action figures, vintage lunchboxes, and comic books. This is all stuff I think I would do as well. Like I would spend a lot of like ridiculous amount of money on all of these things. But I'd ask you guys that to watch as part of the homework assignment. And it's cool if you didn't get to it, but there's a Netflix show called The Toys That Made Us. And particularly episode 1 gets into Star Wars action figures and what it was like to be collecting, in the late 80s, and specifically about what was happening with the release of the action figures. Because I think it's a story that, unless you were there and unless you've watched the Netflix series, you really didn't know what was happening. And I went through this personally. So I guess, did you guys get a chance to watch the episode at all?
I did not.
That's okay.
But I didn't have any Star Wars action figures. This is kind of where my gender comes into play. I collected a ton of Barbies. That's exactly what I did. Like, I still have a closet full of Barbies that have never been opened.
What are you going to do with those?
Hopefully they're going to be worth $1 billion one day.
Oh, okay. $1 billion.
Maybe not $1 billion, but
yeah, well, you never know.
Hopefully, maybe they'll be worth a little something one day.
And Bill, did you get a chance to watch that?
I watched about half of it.
That's okay.
But yeah, it was very entertaining. There were a lot of things I recognized from there. A lot of stuff I guess I missed out on too.
Yeah. And I think I may have told this story, and I'll make it very brief, but I may have told this story on another show. But so when these action figures, so when the movie came out, so let's go back in time to 1977. The movie's just come out, and that Christmas was coming up, right? And and I'm really boiling this down a lot, but they were in a pickle because they had a successful movie on their hands. They were still trying to get these toys manufactured, and there's a whole lot. And again, I'm really hitting this high level. There's a lot of nuance to this, but they really were under a time crunch to get something out at Christmas time because they didn't want to miss the holiday season. And what they ended up doing was giving you this kind of a rain check, so to speak. It was basically a card. So your parents would buy you this card that said, "Hey, son, we're so sorry, but when next year when these action figures come out, you take this into the store and you can trade this in, and they'll have the figures ready."
Right.
And I was one of these victims. I was one of these.
That was you.
I was one of these kids that got this card that said, "Hey, you're gonna get some toys," but not today. Now, my parents did get me other stuff that year. But it was the longest wait in the world to wait for these action figures because they were promoting them. You saw them. The movie was just, again, just it blew all expectations, and it was so popular. I mean, you couldn't do anything without anybody talking about Star Wars or Kiss, the band. But yeah, it was a dreadful wait, and I really hated the fact that we had to wait that long. And then from there on, obviously, the rest is history, right? George Lucas made his billions based on the way he was able to negotiate his cut of the profits from the toys and all of that. And to be honest, a lot of these companies, this company really Kenner didn't understand, or didn't really fully understand, I guess, to give them credit, fully understand what or how big this was going to be and how much money was on the table that they were kind of essentially just walking away from, at least, in terms of what they were able to negotiate. And so this is where, again, George Lucas made all his money, and the rest is history. So it was a really exciting time, and it kind of changed really the toy industry forever, and nothing's been the same ever since this happened. So, do you guys collect anything? Pop figures, plush animals, 12-inch, anything like that today? Any little tchotchkes and stuff that you guys put on your desks or anything like that?
Not so much anything like that. I've got like a few, I've got like pretty much all of the Back to the Future Lego sets that have come out.
Very cool.
I've got those, and then I like to collect vintage vinyl. I'm very big into classic rock, not just 80s music. So I've got a lot of vinyl, trying to grow my collection.
Did you see that the Ready Player One soundtrack is coming out on vinyl?
Yes. And
you need to pick that up.
I totally will as soon as I can.
Bill, what about you? You collecting any toys there?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Growing up, I was a avid Star Wars action figure collector from all three of the original movies.
Yep.
My brother and I, we played with them daily. And I guess like most kids, we were pretty hard on them. I know we wrapped them up in Scotch tape to protect them from the weather on Hoth when it snowed in Austin one year. We put them in the literal trash compactor.
Yeah.
We tied them to arrows and shot them out into the woods. We did
fireworks.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, nothing beat those action figures as a kid. And maybe I've still got a few of them tucked away in my closet for my kids to see one day, but not to play with. Those are mine.
Right. Yep. Don't touch those. Yeah, and what about like today? Like you don't pick up like the anything new, modern pop stuff, collectibles, anything like that?
I have a few of the Funko Pop little figurines, but I don't know. I'm having a little trouble really figuring out what's worthwhile collecting these days. I have a young son. I spend a decent amount of time in toy stores. It just seems like there's this overabundance of toys and branded everything, and nothing seems special enough to really collect. You could try and collect it, but there's so much of it. It's I don't know. It's not like it used to be, and maybe I just haven't found the right thing just yet.
Yeah. Well, there's no abundance of toys in Toys R Us. If that. I'm sorry. Is that too soon? Too soon. I'm gonna miss Toys R Us.
Yeah. That's true too. But I mean, wandering around Target, there are 10 different versions of Luke Skywalker. So, which one?
Yeah, exactly. No, there are. It's a good point. There are lots of different ones, especially when you talk about Funko. Like, I mean, Funko is just insane. Like, I can't even keep up with it. And I have not picked up any of the Ready Player One Funko Pops, which I should have done. I did pick up a lot of them for The Last Jedi. But like you said, it's just, sky's the limit. You can spend as little or as much as you'd like and still not be complete with any of these things. Right.
So really more than anything, as far as collecting, I'm still finding my favorites back from the 80s, like either Star Wars, G.I. Joe, whichever ones that I used to have and used to play with. Those are the ones I'm really only interested in anymore. Yeah, and I've got some, I personally have got some I still have some of my original Star Wars action figures. In fact, I'm looking at a Chewbacca from I think it says 79 on his leg. But he sits right here next to me when I podcast. And I've got, I collected the Funko stuff, and anytime if there's like, I'll pick up like, if it's one of my favorite comic book characters and I see an action figure, just kind of a, impulse buy kind of thing. But yeah, I'm not really doing the collecting stuff like I used to anymore. It's just too much money and I don't have enough space for it anymore. Right. But, yeah. So that was kind of the reference. So again, Star Wars action figures, 1978, really sucked if you were expecting anything back then. And then there's a quote here where basically it says, in December 2012, Gregarious Games rebranded itself as Gregarious Simulation Systems, so GSS. And under this new banner, they launched their flagship product, the only product GSS would ever release, the Oasis.
the ontologically anthropocentric sensory immersive simulation. And I rehearsed that several times before coming on the air. And we're going to talk about that. I think, we can talk. I think we're going to talk about it a little bit later. It's kind of weird because again, this is episode 5, and really it's mentioned first in episode 4. And so I'm going to be recording that in about 2 weeks. So we won't talk about the Oasis just yet. But I did want to touch on the fact that he mentions that it was a holodeck, and there's kind of a reference there about what a holodeck is, and we, as far as I know, I've always just kind of linked that to Star Trek, and what they were able to do in those shows, and it's kind of the same thing, right? You go into this room, and everything looks like reality. You're not wearing any weird gear; it's just a large room kind of thing. But for the homework, I thought we could maybe just talk about that. Maybe did you guys watch Star Trek at all growing up, and was the holodeck something that you look forward to? Because I know people that watch Star Trek, that was like, you would wait for the holodeck saying like, oh, okay, they're in a holodeck, or the show would start, the episode would start, and they were suddenly like, back in the 30s, and you're like, oh, okay, cool, they're in the holodeck, obviously, kind of thing. Were you guys start watching Star Trek at all? Did you get into that series, Morgan?
Well, I didn't watch it as a kid, but I actually have been watching Star Trek recently, off and on over the past couple of years. And yeah, I mean, of course, the holodeck is so cool, and it's definitely funny to see, how they pictured technology way back then, and and what they kind of wanted it to look like.
Yeah, and then a lot of times they would struggle with it, right? Like it's kind of like today, if you hand somebody I saw a funny thing today on Facebook where it showed a little kid, and he had an old pencil sharpener, like the old kind that was mounted on the desk. You would take the pencil in, put it inside there, and on the right-hand side, you had this little handle, and you would spin that around to sharpen your pencil, right? Well, the video was this kid holding it, and he was spinning it, and the parent asked him, hey, what do you have in your hand? He said, it's a fishing reel. So he had no idea what this was, right? And just assumed that it was a fishing reel because it kind of looked like a fishing reel.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, so for Bill, were you guys into this Star Trek at all?
Sure, yeah. I was definitely into Star Trek. The original series was before my time for sure, but The Next Generation is really where I got into watching shows about the holodeck, but I think I saw it more for really what it was, which was kind of a storytelling vehicle. This is a sci-fi show that could escape its genre. You could set a episode in an old-timey town or modern day New York or wherever it was. It was a way to break out of the confines of being in space. But I never really looked forward to it as, hey, this is a really cool piece of technology. It just sort of seemed to meld too closely into what the show was trying to do, except for a few episodes when they really played up, hey, we're in the holodeck, or I'm having a relationship with someone that's in the holodeck. That really sort of the outer edges of those shows.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point. It was kind of it was a storytelling tool or device that was used prominently, but the technology behind it was always something that just fascinated me. And to think that, wow, because I mean, growing up, you'd watch Star Trek and it was science fiction. It wasn't science fantasy. And that's always how it was sold. And even to this day, it's always sold as science fiction. So, and the nuance there is that, all of this could happen someday, that we're just, we don't have the capability to do it yet, but it's coming. And much like we talked about earlier with Back to the Future, there are a lot of things that came out of Star Trek, both in the original series and Next Generation, the cartoon, all of that was, literally science fiction at the time, is now a reality. So it is just a matter of time, I think, before we get there. There's this whole section here where he's kind of talking about, rebranding gregarious games as gregarious simulation systems in the Oasis. So this happens around the year 2012, based on the novel, which, obviously has already passed. But one of the aspects, he's kind of talking about a couple things here and how revolutionary this is. And so he mentions right off the bat that, MMOs at the time had a lot of limitations. And, Bill, you and I talked about World of Warcraft quite a bit on the episode that we were on. But, that was MMOs really are they're kind of like the Oasis, right? Would you agree that to some extent?
Yeah, and definitely in a lot of ways. I mean, it's a virtual world. There are virtual locations, but you're right. It does have its limitations. You can be anyone, but you can choose from one of 6 different faces and that type of thing. So you can explore that fantasy side of things, but only to a specific degree that the developers will let you.
Or the technology will let
Sure,
you, right?
absolutely.
I mean, there's some technical limitations there that don't allow you to be any more than what they've predefined. And then, he mentions that anyone could be anyone. And so this goes, kind of to tie it back to your story earlier, Morgan, with where you were the whole anonymity with the Instagram page that you had. And we see this both in, the novel. It plays out. You've already kind of stole my thunder because we talked about, H and her big reveal, and, Artemis's scar, right? Her wine scar and all that. That was all just anybody could be anyone, and you didn't know who you were talking to. And we should probably just mention that, he's talking about, some of his professors are in the chapter prior to this where, a lot of them, he didn't know what they were. They could have been anybody. I think he mentions one of the professors could have been an Inuit woman somewhere. And, they had the ability to go in and just be whoever they wanted to be, whether it be a teacher or instructor or anyone else. And then one other thing that was kind of really interesting was the visor and the haptic gloves. And this is such a huge, iconic thing now for Ready Player One, the visor itself, right? And it was, this was always fascinating because it was, when I read this, I remember thinking, yeah, that's really cool. Like, that's how it really should be. But it says it used harmless, low-powered lasers to draw the stunningly real environment of the Oasis right into the wearer's retinas, completely immersing the entire field of vision in the online world. Now, I don't know the first thing about how these visors work, but when I read that, I thought, yeah, that's what you want to do, right? You'd want something that would actually throw it on your eye rather than you looking into it, and give you a different experience. But do you, either one of you guys do any virtual reality stuff like headsets or systems or anything like that?
I have not, but I wish. Like, let me save up a little money and then I'll get back to you.
You could sell some of those Barbies and buy
that's true,
yourself.
I guess. Yeah.
Bill, are you doing anything there?
It's funny you mentioned that. Just this past weekend, I found an old Best Buy gift certificate that I had never used because, well, what do you buy at Best Buy anymore?
Printer ink?
Yeah, I guess so. But I took it to Best Buy and I bought a little headset, the Google's VR headset. I hooked it up to my phone and it's pretty cool. It's still very cartoony on the inside, but you can look around in 360 degrees. You can sit inside of a really cool chateau up in the mountains and have a 70-inch television in front of you that's playing Netflix. It was really neat. I haven't had a chance to explore it too much, but it's still far from drawing actual realistic scenes directly on your retina.
Yeah, we're probably a little bit far off from that still, but and I don't personally have anything like that. I mean, there was I think we had like one of those little, like you said, one of the little visors you stick your phone in, and I think we did the roller coaster ride thing, and it was just enough to make us sick and said, all right, we're putting this thing down.
No, I did have that. I totally forgot about that, but we got one of those like a year or so ago. And
it's funny, you watch these videos, there's just all these YouTube videos of these people that have on these like more expensive, elaborate VR headsets, and they're like falling all over the place and swinging and vomiting, and it's all good stuff. But I would imagine we're not too far off from it. So just to talk about the Oasis a little bit more, he mentions that it's the reality engine, or what he refers to as the open source reality engine, and he mentions that the Oasis is kind of like an online utopia. And I want to get into just very briefly before we finish up here about the revenue strategy. So with MMOs, at least when, like, let's just take World of Warcraft, right? Because that's one that you and I played, Bill.
Sure.
But that was like originally when it came out, it was you buy the game up front, you pay a monthly fee, and that was pretty much it. There wasn't anything else that you had to pay for.
Right.
As that game went on, the whole onset of microtransactions started to come in from at mobile devices, and then eventually bled over into the PC market. And now suddenly you were spending not only your monthly fee on top of the upgrade or the upfront costs of the box set, but you were paying, 25 cents here, $1 here. Well, let's be realistic. I think they were probably more than that, like $10 here or whatever on top of all that. And what was interesting is now to this day, like that just is the model. Like there's so many video game systems and, whatever. There's lots of video games out there that everything is based on microtransactions. And that's just the model that we're in today. Do you guys do anything right now that you're hooked on that you're not only just, paying X amount of money, but you've realized, oh my God, I've already spent $200 in this stupid game?
Sure. Well, I mean, going back to World of Warcraft, yes, you're right. I mean, all you would do is you'd buy the game outright and then you pay a monthly fee. But even back then, there were gold farmers, right? There were people that would spend their time buying it. But if you bought gold back in the early days with real money, that was very taboo. You were really looked down upon for doing that.
Yeah.
And now Blizzard has a store online that you can pay money and get gold delivered to your inbox.
Really?
And, yeah, absolutely.
Well, looks like I'm getting back in the game.
That's right. It's time to start playing Warcraft again. But sure, I still play Clash of Clans, and I've spent $5 buying gems. I'm not immune to it.
All right, Morgan, you can come clean with us now. What are you playing on your phone there that you're spending money on?
Well, I'm very proud to say that I have not spent any money yet, but I have spent a lot of time on Fortnite lately.
Oh no, yeah. You're a Fortnite person.
Yeah, I got sucked in.
I don't know what that means.
I kept seeing advertisements for it, and I got sucked in.
Now, do they do microtransactions on the game?
You can,
where you can buy like different weapons and upgrades and stuff like that.
I don't think that you can actually buy any kind of upgrades. It's pretty much all cosmetic.
Yeah. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they have like they call them V-Bucks, and they've got different price points and certain amounts that you can buy. And yeah, I'm pretty sure it's all cosmetic, which is honestly ridiculous. I can't believe people spend money on that. Yep. But there's also like another game. It's called Save the World, and you can spend like $40 on that and get early access to it. Apparently it'll be free like later this year. But yeah, I haven't spent any money, but I know a lot of people have because I see the gear that they have and the skins.
Yeah, and so with Fortnite, and I won't make this into the Fortnite podcast, but is that really just a first-person shooter, or is there more to it?
I mean, yeah, it's basically just a first-person shooter, and then obviously you have to do the building. If you are good enough, you'll get into confrontations with enemies, and you'll have to not only shoot at them, but you'll also have to build like, a fort around yourself at the same time. So
there's like objectives, right? Is that what you're...
Not really.
All right.
I mean, it's just like you just...
All right, I'm going to have to go play this then, because I'm mildly curious about it, interested in it, but
there's a lot of different elements. Like there's a storm that closes in on the map, and if you are outside of the eye of the storm, it'll kill you. You got to watch out for the enemies. You got to get all your supplies, and it's a lot. It's a lot to handle. That
sounds like life.
I mean, it's life after the apocalypse happens.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is that really the premise of the game?
Basically, yeah. Like a meteor.
Oh, okay.
A meteor hits this, this world, this map, and yeah, it's every man for himself.
Wow, Albert. All I know is if that actually happens, you and I are in big trouble.
Yeah, we are really in big trouble.
I'm headed to Morgan's house.
Yeah. I really want to talk about the microtransactions. I'm glad we brought up Fortnite, because that's a good example. It's a relevant example, especially right now with the number of people that they've got playing that game. But it's interesting because even in the Oasis, so the Oasis was 25 cents, right? Mm-hmm. You'd buy the game for 25 cents, and then they were really making their money. Halliday's like business model was, there was virtual objects. In fact, in the book, it mentions that people were paying money for just really nothing. like virtual things, like kind of like Fortnite, like the costumes and avatar skins and all that stuff, right? So you had that aspect of it, right? And that was probably catering to the more like the general public or the players of the Oasis, people that weren't like hardcore folks. And then on top of that, there were two other revenue streams. They had fuel costs. So, he talks about how, it was very expensive to go anywhere in the game. And that's why earlier on we kind of started the show talking about how he was landlocked. He couldn't go anywhere because he didn't have any money. And the only way he could get around was either he had to buy fuel, which he couldn't do, or he would buy to be teleported somewhere, which he couldn't afford either. But it was a way for GSS to make money because they could sell fuel to travel, literally light years in the Oasis, and make a ton of money there. And then the third revenue stream they had was this concept of surreal estate. So they were building, businesses. This is where they were catering to like the commercial markets of the business field, where people would say, business would say, hey, I'd like to set up a mall, or I want to build a, whatever kind of building here. And they would sell this real estate at a premium price to these businesses, knowing that they would have way more customers coming because it was anybody and everyone that was in the Oasis. So it no longer was physical location, one of the limitations or maybe a factor in determining whether or not your business was going to be successful. Now with the Oasis, you could just build a building and you would have, a number of people coming from all over the world, literally without really much problem to your particular store or whatever it is you were selling for your wares. So it was a very interesting concept that I thought in terms of how they were making money. And you got to wonder how much money they did make because, obviously he had quite a bit of money that he left to as part of the hunt and the winner of all that. So, and I guess the last thing, and we'll kind of end it here, was really about, there's a quote in there where he's talking about, love relationships and the reality of all. And Bill, you and I touched on this in the episode that we did where we were kind of talking about World of Warcraft, because you and I both know some people very, firsthand who met in World of Warcraft, fell in love. And you can, take that for what it is, but, they got married and both in game and outside of the game. And it's just one of those things that it just happens. And I think I mentioned this on the episode that when we talked about this, but when you talk about this kind of a concept to somebody, unless they've done this thing, right? Unless they've played these games and they've been involved and spent 20, 30 hours in a game like this with other people, I get it. It's kind of hard to understand. It's kind of hard to grasp. It almost seems silly. Like, how can you really do that? And the reality is you're spending so much time with them and you're having conversations with them. You're getting to know who they are, whether it's, real or not, but you're getting to know who they are. You're getting to know their personality. That, it's very feasible. And it's the reality. People do find, love, and people do create very, apart from just love relationships, very strong bonds with one another, much like you would do anything else. And it just, with the Oasis, it's one of those things where it would seem like it would be that much more impactful. The bonds would be that much more strong because of just how real it all was. Bill, do you have any other examples, I guess, maybe that where we saw this in some of the games that we've played, I think, online before?
Definitely meeting friends. We've had people come from all across the country to hang out with us. We've traveled across the country to meet people in real life that we would never have thought of right when we began playing these games. We've seen people get married. We've seen people get divorced. We've seen families crumble. We've seen all kinds of things that you see the social aspect play out in a non-reality situation. So they're still humans and there's still human emotions, and all of those things still take place. Yeah.
I mean, it's a whole aspect. There's a whole aspect of the psychology behind it too that is very interesting and intriguing. Morgan, have you, and not to say that, I'm not asking if you've ever fallen in love online, but do you played anything like this or gotten into or like met folks or had relationships with folks that were virtual that, you felt like, hey, I really kind of do know this person now?
Yeah, not so much in a gaming aspect. I've never really gotten into that, but definitely like over social media, like even, when I created my Ready Player One page, there's people I talk to every day that, some of them live in a different country. Some of them live in a different state. I've never met them before, but, they've become my friends. And, we talk about what we're watching, what we're listening to. And I've never really had anything like that before with somebody I didn't actually know. So it's pretty crazy when you really like step back and think about it. Whenever I was, a little kid, this type of relationship didn't exist, and when y'all grew up, the whole time y'all were growing up, it didn't exist. If there was somebody that lived in New York City, you just didn't know them.
That's right. They just didn't exist to you.
Exactly.
It's all very true. It's fascinating aspect of society and certainly again the psychology behind it all. And just to kind of close it out on that particular the end of chapter 5, he says some of them met, fell in love, and got married without ever setting foot on the same continent. The lines of distinction between a person's real identity and that of their avatar began to blur. It was the dawn of a new era, one where most of the human race now spent all of their free time inside a video game. And that kind of brings us to the end of chapter 5. And it goes. We won't spoil chapter 6, but it's going to go right into the school, and we're going to get into a lot of pop culture references. So before we kind of wrap all this up, Morgan, any final thoughts from you on James Halliday? Anything that we didn't get a chance to cover? Anything around that, or maybe even the Oasis?
Yeah. Well, I will say I was thinking about this when I was doing my homework, and as much as I love Halliday and who he is and what he created, and this might be a little depressing, I felt sad for him, even though he doesn't even exist. Just because he was so isolated from the world, and he had Morrow and Kira, but eventually they weren't even in his life either. And I think that definitely kind of attests to the fact that while it's so great that we have this new world opened up to us where we can have relationships with people we've never even met, it's not quite the same as, being face to face with somebody and actually getting to know them in person and see them up close.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And it's one that gets hammered home, later on, and we won't obviously spoil that, but it's not a spoiler. If you're listening to the show, you probably read the book, but
I would hope so.
Yeah, I would hope so. But, later on, and literally, I think it's the very last chapter of the book, we kind of get that same message, right? He kind of urges him to go, spend some time with everybody, go outside. Ogden Morrow tells him as well, get out there, see the real world, even though this is amazing, go do that. And then if you go, just take it back to the movie, the very end of it, right, it's a little different. But in the movie, Wade mentions that he basically, and I forget now, I think he says he closed down the Oasis on certain days.
Yeah.
For people just to go out and be together, right? To have those physical relationships. So
I thought that was a great touch, honestly.
Yeah, I did too. I really liked the way it ended. And Bill, anything for you? Any final thoughts on Halliday and the Oasis that we didn't get a chance to cover? Any final thoughts, sir?
Sure. The Oasis, it definitely seems to be the direction that we're headed, which would be amazing. And while this book was never preachy about be careful what you wish for, it certainly did spell out that living life only on the inside of the game has its consequences.
Yeah.
And given the ending of the book and the function of the button, I think that Halliday knew that better than anybody.
Yep. Yeah, very good. Cool. Well, we will end it here. Before I run through all the funny stuff with where to find us and all that, Morgan, do you want to just kind of share where people can find you on social media?
Yeah. People can find me at _ReadyPlayer1_ and also at mkitch23. That's MKITCH 23. That's my personal page. yeah, I'm still posting on my Ready Player One page when I can, and hopefully I will be doing some more things soon. I don't want to like talk about them too much, but I got some ideas.
Right.
I got some
looking
ideas.
Forward.
Yeah, looking forward to that. And I'll post your social media links on our show notes as well. So if you didn't catch that, check the show notes at the bottom. You'll see it there. Okay, with that, if you'd like to follow us, you can follow us on Instagram at The Basement RPO. We are on Twitter at The Basement RPO, Facebook /The Basement RPO. Vero is just The Basement. You can do a search there and find us. We do have a Patreon page up as well. That link will be in there. And if you want some gear or any of that stickers and all that stuff with the logo, you can do that at TeePublic. That link will be down there as well. It's the Gunter chapter next, chapter 6. It's the one that I've been dreading because it's just so full of stuff. But we will be doing our best to break that stuff down. And given the sheer amount of content, I think we're going to have to break that up into a number of different shows. So don't be surprised if we're on, part 8 of chapter 6 coming up here at some point. But kind of we expect we're going to be talking about some of Halliday's favorite authors like Terry Brooks, Neil Gaiman, William Gibson, who's one of my favorite writers. We'll talk about some movies that were in his almanac, like War Games, which I have on VHS. Super excited about popping that in and watching that. Better Off Dead. Gee, Ricky, I'm sorry your mom blew up. That's a quote from that movie. And Revenge of the Nerds. So tons and tons of stuff coming up in chapter 6. So definitely looking forward to kind of breaking all that down. So that's going to do it for us for this episode. Again, happy birthday to James Halliday here on June 12th. And we will see you guys next time on The Basement. Have a good night. The views and opinions of The Basement hosts are of our own and are not in any way affiliated with Random House or Ernest Klein. All quotes, music, sounds, trademarked, and copyrighted material referenced in the show are owned by the respectful companies and creators and are used by The Basement as fair use for entertainment purposes only. It would take me a month to read this whole disclaimer, but sad to say, I don't have that kind of time.